My name is Seb, and I help run Rating Recipes, a site that shows how different applications ask for users to rate and leave reviews. In this video, I quickly wanted to show how I typically analyze different Android applications to find out how they ask for ratings and reviews from their users. On the ratingsrecipes.com website, we have a couple different apps listed here. And for example, I'll pull up the Etsy app, which I took a look at a couple weeks ago. And you can see here, Etsy is an e-commerce app where you can buy homemade craft items. I bought an item on Etsy, and then immediately after I purchased it, I saw the in-app rating from Etsy. And you can see here, this is the flow that I found in the Etsy application, where if the user completes a purchase, they can then go to the in-app rating flow. There's also an additional flow once the package or whatever I purchased, in this case, I purchased a candle, was delivered. You can also see an additional in-app rating flow. And you can see some of the analytics and the device variables that this application uses for tracking this flow. So the main purpose of this video is to show how do I find out all this information. I don't work for any of these companies. I don't have access to their code, but as a person who's inquisitive and wants to learn more, how can I find out this information? So I'm going to do this completely live. I haven't done any prior research. I'll show you the exact process that I go through. I'll show you the bumps and the hurdles that it takes to actually do this analysis, to do a full analysis of one of these. I've done a number of them. I can probably do them maybe in an hour or less, but to actually just even get just the basic information, you can probably get to that in a couple minutes. And I'll show you the tools and what's needed to get there. So to get started, we first need to pick an application that we want to take a look at. There's a bunch of applications I listed here. These were some of the top apps on Google Play, at least in the US market for the Play Store that I looked at. And sorry, my phone mentioned the G word and my phone starts up. And these are the apps that I've taken a look at so far. These are other apps that I haven't taken a look at so far. Typically, when you want to look at an app, if you look at a very popular, especially large application, it's probably going to be more work, right? There's two reasons for that. One is there's just simply more code, right? So there's a lot more third-party libraries and dependencies. For example, if you look at the Burger King app or Canva, I think even Hulu, these are just larger applications with a lot of code, a lot of extra stuff. So it takes longer to look through all of the information within the app to find what you're looking for. And the second part is typically they tend to obfuscate the code a little bit better. We'll touch into that, what that means. But essentially, larger apps, larger team, they tend to try to modify the code to make it less easy to be read. It still can be read. It just takes a little bit longer. If you're first starting out, I'd recommend an application that might not be as popular or might not have as a large development team. They tend to have less code, tends to be more readable, tends to usually be a little less obfuscated. And then the other thing to keep in mind too is some apps are written in cross-platform languages. I believe I took a look at Burger King a couple weeks ago. It's written, I think, really even React Native. It's a little harder to take a look at some of these apps. A lot of the code's in JavaScript, and it's very obfuscated. Native apps, or apps that are native developably, which are, I think, almost all of these, usually written in Kotlin or Java, a lot easier to take a look at the code. Not saying that you can't look at a code for a React Native app, it just takes a lot longer. So for a first app to start with, I'd probably also take a look at see if they have the in-app rating library. I actually ran a script to look through all these, I think there's 50 apps here, to see if they had in-app rating code ahead of time. That does help me narrow down, like, can I see the in-app rating prompt? If an app doesn't have an in-app rating prompt, you can still take a look at their source code and see maybe how they ask users for reviews, but you might not as easily find or quickly find how specifically do they get to that in-app rating flow. So taking a look through here, maybe we can take a look at Pluto TV. And this app, I did do some research ahead of time to see that it actually did have an in-app rating prompt. So the first thing we need to do is we need to get the application APK. There are a number of sites that distribute this. You could go through the trouble of downloading it on Google Play, getting it off your phone. That definitely you can do. It just takes longer. I don't know the validity of these sites. Definitely when I've been doing app development, I always hated sites that distributed the APK externally off Google Play. People would use it. They wouldn't be able to update it very easily. But there's a number of these sites out there. APK Pure is one of them that just pops up immediately. I don't think there's malware or anything bad on these APKs. I don't know 100% for sure though. I'd be very careful with any APKs you randomly download off the internet. I probably absolutely would not install one on my phone if it wasn't, through Google Play or a certified app store. But this is definitely an easy way to get access to a basic, application to at least look at the code, not necessarily an app that we want to use. So this is an XAPK, which means it has a couple different APKs inside of it, and that should be fine. I'll show you how to work with that. So I'll download this Pluto Live TV. I'll show it in my Finder. And so this is an XAPK, just means it has other apps in it. Typically, you might have it just as a single APK, which you can begin to immediately analyze. If it's in one of these packaged APKs, you can simply just change the file name extension to .zip. And then unzip that file, and then you'll see a number of APKs in there. This is, the different bundling mechanisms with different localizations. There's also some architecture-specific features here. This is like C++ native code. This may be like video playback in the case of Pluto TV. But we don't really have to worry about these APKs. The one that we care about is this one right here. This is not a config APK. And so we're going to take a look at this. And so how do we look at an APK that we downloaded? We use a tool called jadx. And excuse me if I'm botching the name here. It could be called jadx or something like that. It's developed or it's maintained by this developer Skylot on GitHub. Definitely worth taking a look at and looking through this decompiler code. There's a number of other tools that are out there. This one I found really, really helpful. It's very well maintained. Yeah, it's really easy to decompile the app and at least start looking at some of the code that's within it. You can clone the project here. I think they also have ability to download just ready to go binary. I just cloned this off GitHub, and then I ran the instructions for getting this set up. So it's great old wdist, and I can show that. But yeah, it's very easy to use, and highly recommended using this tool. So let's go use the tool. So this is the jadx that I cloned off of GitHub, and then when you run that great old w.dist tool or dist command that I showed a minute ago, you'll actually go into the build folder, into jadx, into bin. And so in this folder path right here, you'll see this jadx GUI. There's the jadx GUI, and then there's the command line tool. The command line tool is really great for like analyzing a number of files, and then maybe if you want to do like a text search through them. But for like actually really digging into a specific application, the jadx GUI is very, very helpful. So let's open up this jadx GUI. And so I launched that, and I'll open up this Pluto TV. Actually, this is the folder, so we shouldn't open up that. We need to open up that specific APK, right? This tv.pluto one. So I'll open that up. And it takes a couple minutes to load. I have made some tweaks here that I'll show you that are probably pretty helpful. And maybe I can paste this in the video, or maybe on the GitHub website that we have for ratings recipes to show some of the modifications I had. But there's two main modifications. The first is pumping up the total available memory. I think the default's 2 gigabytes. Probably works for most applications, but especially for larger applications, it's not ideal. So I'll show you the change that I made. It's not required. I wouldn't do it the first time you do it, but if you notice you're running into memory limitations, this is something good to do. Let me paste that in right here. So I think it's the jadx GUI file. And you'll notice here, I set this default JVM ops to 6 gigabytes. And you see that right down here. That's helpful. Default again is 2. I'll paste this little code in here. And as long as you have this in this jadx, this bash script that launches the application, that will increase the total load. The other thing that you might want to do is to limit the number of files that you try to analyze. There's a lot of third-party library dependencies in here. We don't really care about most of them. A lot of them are just basic, core functionality application development libraries that don't really have much to do specific to like if we're looking for ratings or reviews or any of those types of flows. You'll see like these retrofit libraries, Kotlin, Dagger, like we can ignore most of them. So if you go here to preferences, to excluded packages, you'll see I excluded a lot of these packages here. These are pretty common libraries. There's definitely more, but I'll try to post this. And this is really nice because it limits the amount of code and files that you're looking at. And again, helpful if you run into memory limitations or looking at a very large application, right? So this is code from like third parties that we really don't care about. All right, so the first thing we want to do is press the search button. And you'll notice once we press the search button, it starts to actually do an additional step of decompiling. So once you press that search button, I usually just let it sit for 30 seconds, a minute, however long it takes. You'll see it's processing additional files. This could take up to a couple minutes. Since I'm recording this on my computer, it's going to take even longer on overhead. I don't have like a great setup on my computer. I'm sure if you have like a computer with a bunch of memory and processing power, this is a lot faster. In my case, sometimes it takes a couple minutes. But we'll let that decompile, and it will show you, issues this is running into, errors. And yeah, we just want to wait till it gets to 100%, and then we can start to search in our code. While we're waiting for that, you can see a number of little filters and toggles that you can do up here. Some of them are standard, like the case insensitive, which is great. But you can actually search through not only code, but like comments and stuff. You'll notice that the code that is decompiled, like, isn't really runnable. Sometimes it looks kind of like bytecode. Like it's not like perfect representation of like what the developer had or what the developer is working on, but that's okay. A lot of times we can understand functionality even if the code isn't perfectly deobfuscated or looked at. And I've never used the Pluto TV app before. I just saw it on the top list. I don't know. Assume it's an app where you can go in and watch movies and stuff like that, or television shows. Have no idea, but we can still, even without even having ever used the app, we can still look at the code and start seeing like what's there. Sometimes it helps to download the app as well and just maybe go through a quick run through to see the different screens and the functionality. But this is just a blind analysis. So the first thing that I look for reviews, if there's an in-app rating library, and I had that list, ReviewInfo is really helpful. So ReviewInfo is the native code that Android uses for in-app ratings. Again, you don't necessarily have to have in-app ratings in the app. You can have the user directed to the Play Store. I might make another video showing how I look at that kind of functionality, but for in-app reviews, definitely want to look at ReviewInfo. I'll pull this up over here. And this is the documentation. And you could take a look through more of this, but you'll see this is in the Play Core library. And this implements information about the reviews. So if you actually implement in-app ratings within your application, this is a standard class and name that you'll use. And I've noticed this when I'm looking through applications. I look through ReviewInfo. That's usually a good indicator that the application is using in-app ratings. There's other different signifiers in here that you can use, but this is the best one I found for me personally so far. So we'll look in here. We see ReviewInfo. We see it used in a couple different places, but this is great. We see this used in UserFeedbackDispatcher, and we see them using the core ReviewInfo. So we'll click on that, and we'll go into the code over here. And sometimes like these class names are 100% obfuscated. In this case, it's not, which is a lot easier to look at. But even if it's obfuscated, you'd still see like this, it's using ReviewInfo here, and you can still kind of trace through the code. But the fact that this isn't obfuscated and it says UserFeedbackDispatcher, that's really helpful for us. That probably means that, in looking at these applications, they probably show some type of screen to ask for user feedback, I would imagine. And this is a way of, trying to find out if the user is suitable for getting a review. It looks like they have some type of interface here. We can click into that. So they have this dispose, on app launch, on content play, on guide load, set review activity. I would imagine for this interface, this is really helpful for us. Maybe there's some tie-in on app launch to be able to try to see when the user launched the app. Maybe at that point we're trying to prompt for a review, or we might be using on app launch to track how many launches the user had, to see if they had enough launches that we should show them a review because they're happy with the app. On content play, I assume this is to help keep track of when a user played something, and maybe they're keeping track of how many times they played it. On guide load, maybe this is like a menu system, like in a TV guide. Also helping keep track of how many times the user has done something to see if we should show them or ask for feedback or a rating. And then set review activity. I believe when you ask for a review, you need to associate it with a screen or an activity. And so in this case, I would assume this is used for saying, hey, this is the activity or the screen that we want to ask for the in-app rating on. And so that's the interface there. Again, it's really helpful. It's not deobfuscated, but just looking at that, we can understand this a lot faster. And again, typically with smaller apps, they're less deobfuscated, but not always the case. So we have some stuff in here. We have the shared preferences repository. It's probably used for keeping track of, the number of times the user has done something. It's, local persistence. We have some schedulers in here for firing off work on maybe on the background thread. There's a feature system in here. So maybe there's, they can turn the review feature on and off for the application. You'll see that very, very common. Looks like, is this review requested? Maybe this is a Boolean that we set somewhere in here. And then, so this is some RxJava stuff to actually get this work running on the right thread. And then, okay, that's probably the main stuff in here. We'll take a look at this a little bit. We have some stuff about time unit that's passed in. That's usually an indicator of you'll often see that people try to see how many days has it been since the user last review. So, or, it's one reason why people pass in time, but we'll take a deeper look at that. So we'll go in here. And this code is kind of readable, but not really. But it looks like they have this is user feedback enabled feature. So this is a feature that they can maybe turn on remotely on and off if it's working well. You typically, when you ship out a feature, you have a flag to turn it on and off and toggle it. That's something that's there. Is app launch limit reached? There's this launch count and app launch count key. It's probably used for keeping track of how many times has the user launched the app. You'll see 5. So this is probably a pretty good indicator that if the user launches the app 5 times, we're probably going to have some type of logic in here to trigger this in-app rating flow. So yeah, if we have on app launch, if user feedback is enabled, we definitely increment this count key. So this is looking like a pretty straightforward rating flow, and it makes sense, right? You don't definitely want to ask the user if they've used the app a lot and that they like it. You want to ask them for feedback or for the rating. If they haven't, maybe they just don't have enough time and to actually assess the app to see if they like it. So all this good stuff in here. We have all these checks, and so here's the time unit here. So this is 5 minutes. And I don't know, maybe this means like channel switch count, like we try to ask the user 5 minutes after they are in a movie, or afterwards. Maybe they don't want to prompt the user immediately when they launch the app. Maybe there's a certain time that they want to ask for the review, like later on. And the same thing here. There's this 30-second timeout on guide loaded. So maybe if you load the guide, maybe 30 seconds later, the in-app rating pops up, and then maybe this is for when you're switching channels, 5 minutes after you switch a channel, it pops up. And so these are ways of just not interrupting the user. You don't want to you could ask the user immediately when they open the app, but they're probably going to want to watch something or like browse something. This is a way of kind of catching the user when, maybe they're at a pause moment, or they finished some action, they finished watching something, finished finding what they wanted, and then having them review it. Because if you ask them immediately, they're probably going to dismiss it. Okay, we'll look at here. There's some more logic for time info. But I think even with a couple minutes of this analysis, we found out a pretty quick insight into maybe how is this app looking at these reviews. And so like, yeah, for your competitors, right, for whatever app you're building, you can look at all the competitor apps, and you can actually take apart and see like, how are they doing this theoretically for other features as well, not just ratings and reviews. But if there's a specific feature that you want to look at from a technical level, not necessarily from a user level, you can start to pick apart and see like, how is this application actually doing that? What is some of the functionality? Is there secret sauce and the client side that this application's doing? Some apps have a lot of backend logic, and this client side logic is very, very dumb. Like some apps, like the number of times you count the app launches, it has to equal 5. Some apps will do that completely on the back end. So it's not always on the client side in terms of how this is done, but in this case, there's a lot of client side code we can take a look at. So there's some stuff in here for the launch review has been completed, but I'm gonna look for review info. So we see this code for launch review, and this is probably actually launching the review flow. You can go in here, you can right click there, you can do find usages. And just like in your Android Studio IDE, if you are Android Studio developer, you can actually see where this code is called. And we can see this code is called here, is reviewed requested, and subscribe to review flow. We'll find usages there. And it's called here in this crazy obfuscated name Lambda. We can look at that, see where that is called, and we're just tracing the code back. So this is in a scheduler. This is fired over here. And then there's this call called subscribe to review flow. We'll find out where that is called. Looks like it's called in a couple different places. And I think we saw that right when the channel changed or the guide changed. On content play, find usages is that. There's no usages here, but sometimes since this is, I think we saw this on content play in an interface. Sometimes find usages doesn't work well there, but we can just search for on content play over here, and we'll see a bunch of places that it pops up. Looks like in the main fragment over here, they call on contact play on that interface. So that's why I didn't show up and find usages. And we can keep seeing this. Where is this called? Where is this called? And keep going back all the way. So I assume, like, I would imagine this is like maybe a screen. There's a bunch of like things that you could press to play, like different TV shows or whatever. And then when you click on one, that this little callback is fired. I would imagine that is how this works, but I'm not 100% sure. So we'll see this media content passed in. And then this is bound either to maybe to like a list or recycler view or something like that. All right. I don't think we need to do that much more further analysis. I think in this case, I would actually download the app. I would kill it 5 times, and then maybe I'd go to the guide screen and I'd wait 30 seconds to see if it actually, the in-app rating popped up. That is the basic for how I do that. I'm going to do that right afterwards. If you see Pluto TV pop up on the ratings recipes website or the open source channel, like that means I actually went through that process. And so I'll show you quickly on the ratings recipes GitHub what I would do at this point. And if anybody else wants to contribute, like, I mean, I'd love to have other people see like, how does this work and what's involved here. Again, if you're good, like sometimes it can take half an hour, but your first one's probably going to take maybe a couple hours to do. We go into the apps, and you can go in here in Etsy, and you can see, we have some basic information here in terms of like the analytics and the device variables that we found. Similar to how we saw that app count information, we'd probably add that here. And then for the actual flow itself, this is all done in plant UML. So it's all done in text, and then the flow is rendered as a diagram. And I'd go in here and I do like, has the app been launched 5 times, and has the user waited whatever 30 seconds on the guide, and then show the in-app rating. And I'd take a couple screenshots as you saw over there and add to that. So that's exactly how I look at these. I've looked at 10 so far. Well, I've looked at a lot more of the apps, but I've written down 10 so far. If there are apps that you're interested in and you really want to hear about, you can open up an issue on this ratings recipes on GitHub. We have a bunch of apps here already. These ones are much larger, so they're actually harder to look at. But if there's like, definitely if there's a smaller one, it's a lot faster to look at. Larger ones will take more time. Leave there. We also have a newsletter. If you go to ratingsrecipes.com, if you click to subscribe to receive new recipes, you can see some of the past recipes that we send out. We try to send out maybe one every week, every couple weeks, so you can take a look at how different apps are doing this. And then you can just subscribe to that newsletter. You can reply to it and just say, hey, I'm interested in this application. Can you add it to the list of apps that you're going to look at? So that's an overview of how do we use jadx? How do we decompile the application? What are we looking for? And how do we quickly find rating and review information for an application? You can expand this to other stuff, right? This is a really good skill to have. I'm really grateful that there's all this great tooling and stuff that I get to use, and people have built to be able to analyze these apps. And the more that I've started looking at other applications, the more that I learn. And so I highly recommend it. And that's it. Hopefully it inspires you to go ahead and look at an application and see the code that's there. If there's anything else that you're interested in or want to learn, leave comments, email, reply to the newsletter, open an issue, whatever. You can get in contact with myself through the GitHub project or the newsletter.